I actually sat down and read books on how to give a good presentation. There weren't many books out at this point in time. And I started developing a better way to tell a story. Still get your message across from a scientific standpoint, but how can you tell a story? How can you engage your audience? And I'm going to talk about emotional content. You need to think about the emotional content and literally, not just figuratively, are people sitting back like you all are right now? And you're dispassionately listening to me. I want to say things that bring you forward, quite literally, in terms of like, wow, that's kind of interesting. And then I actually want to push you back in your seats again. And then I want to bring you forward again. So I want to go through this little bit of a story with you, and I want to engage you and weave in my science while doing so. Because doesn't matter if you're standing up at a podium, you're giving a very scientific presentation, doesn't matter if it's your dissertation defense. You want to engage your audience, you want them to be involved in what you're doing. And oftentimes, from a scientific standpoint, we don't even come close to doing that. We bore everybody to tears, and then we try to draw some conclusions, and our 10 minutes is up and we walk away. If you're thinking about a story, a classic three-act story, there's some context, there's some background that's developed. Let's go with Star Wars. Hopefully everyone in this room has seen Star Wars. Okay, one person shaking their head, so that's okay. Star Wars is a great three-act trilogy. Every movie is a fantastic. Same with Lord of the Rings. Same with Indiana Jones. They're good three-act stories. There's some context to give you background. Start developing a character. There's a goal where the hero is now developed, and you introduce an antagonist. There has to be something you're fighting against, and really what you want is for your audience to be the hero. You want your audience to feel like, I can do this too. I want to be on this trip with you. You want to engage them in what's happening. There's some conflict. There's a clashing of this hero and antagonist, and then there's some resolution. That's a classic three-act Shakespearean type drama. Well, back in 1864, Freytag, who was a German playwright, he developed the Fiveact, and he actually gave it shape, where he introduced the term climax. So you have the exposition, again, the background. You're developing the character itself. Osteoarthritis, that is our antagonist. We're developing the background. MSK injury. Okay? There's some rising action, and there's a climax when those two forces, you, the hero, and the evil osteoarthritis, come into contact with each other. And then there's some falling action, denouement, there's some resolution. So for the first time, telling a story had a framework, it had a shape. And actually, without knowing it, I guess I formulated my running room talk, and we probably give 75 to 90 talks a year. And we've got a nice set formula for doing so. We always change it every year, but it follows a shape. Not this shape. This was just introducing an arc, climaxing to something and then falling down to something else. And what you want to do is you want to map your talk onto this shape. This is emotional content, and you want to tell people what's going on and tell them how it could be. Then you want to bring them back down. What do we know? What could we know? And you want to end on a very high note. And I don't think I've ever seen, aside from a keynote presentation, I have never seen a scientific presentation that ends on a really positive note. It ends on a mediocre context of, hey, we did some good research here. I hope I made my point. And you walk off the stage. And what you want to do is to create that new bliss. So let's put this in a scientific context. And this is how I think about every presentation that we give to runners, to walkers, to potential donors to the clinic, anybody who comes through. This is time on this axis, and then you want to make an emotional connection with people. So if you look at the literature that deals with engaging an audience and promoting emotional connection with people, you actually don't want to start on a high note. You want to start on a low note. It's okay for them to be sitting back in their chair. It's actually comfortable. It's physically comfortable. And you're setting yourself up for success by starting low. So what I propose, what I like to do, what I find to be quite successful is you start Start on the low note. Make it low. Make it depressing. Make it a bad story. Introduce the antagonist. Let everyone know that they are the hero with you. We are going to do this together. Because osteoarthritis is going to crush the health system. It will far outpace the gross domestic product of Canada within 20 years in terms of the expense of it. So just start on a low note. Depress people. Because they're expecting something totally different. They're expecting a very traditional scientific presentation where it starts with, here's the problem, here's some limitations, and we move on. So start on an emotional low. And this is, again, necessary because people are comfortable. You're not all of a sudden drawing them in. You're building a context. And I let them know that there's a lot of great researchers and there's some good work to do, but we have a long ways to go. But what could be is where you send them. So what if we could actually decrease the progression of osteoarthritis? What if we could prevent it altogether? What if we could, I'm going to talk about running injuries. Okay, and I have a very short presentation at the end where I'll try to take you through these steps. There's always this but. So we know that osteoarthritis, well, I'll stick with running injuries. That's what I know best, okay? So we know that out-of-pocket expenses for running injuries is $4 billion a year. We know that for 35 years, 50% of runners get injured every year. So if you're a runner, you're waiting to get injured. If you haven't been injured for 2 years, you're going to get injured this year. There's nothing you can do about it. But what if we could? What if we could predict running injuries? What if I could send you an email at the end of a run saying, great run, by the way, you're on the verge of an injury. Here's what you might want to do in order to prevent that. Wouldn't that be nice? So everyone's just a little bit more smiley and engaged now because that would be nice. Wouldn't that be nice to get that kind of email? But there's a lot of problems with the research that's out there. Blah, blah, blah. I'll go into this in greater detail. So bring them right back down. Make this gap as wide as possible. Give them a utopian vision. That's why we're doing research. What's an actual deliverable is what you should be aiming for in terms of what could be. There's a lot of problems with existing research. It's low power, low sample size. It's only usually in one location. It's not multi-centered. And we look at variables in the same way that we've been looking at variables for the last 20 years. And it hasn't solved our problem. 50% of runners get injured. Billions of dollars have gone into footwear industry. Still, 50% of runners get injured every year. But our research is geared towards injury prediction. Our research is geared towards collaborative, multi-centered, worldwide research to answer some of these questions. We're on the verge of being able to predict injuries. So you've created this nice emotional context, an emotional void. Now you're at the purpose of your study. So start down, bring them up, bring them back down, bring them back up. Steve Jobs' classic speech when he introduced the iPhone, how it maps onto this over and over and over again. Cell phones suck. They're cumbersome. They're awful. They don't hold much memory. You can't play music off of them. The interface is awful. But, hey, I've got something new. We created something. It's kind of cool. And then he turns it on. You could just hear the oxygen get sucked out of the room when he turned it on for the first time and people saw scrolling. Now, scrolling was introduced 3 years earlier during a TED Talk. It's an awesome TED Talk. This guy has a huge screen, and he's blowing things up and minimizing and moving. It was fantastic. MIT professor. So Apple just bought that technology and put it into a tiny little device. And then Steve goes back, because I know Steve, so I'll call him Steve. So then Mr. Jobs goes back and starts talking about what's the problem with cell phones these days? And he talks through some real tangible problems. Look at our phone. And he starts doing some more things in interactive approaches. And then he brings it back down and just does this over and over and over again. Martin Luther King, you could map his I have a dream speech. There's a lot of political unrest, but I have a dream. I dream one day, da-da-da. There's a lot of racial unrest, but I have a dream. And he brings you back up again. And he brings you on this emotional roller coaster where he just captivates you and then depresses you. And he captivates you and he depresses you. And there's no reason we can't apply the same principle to a scientific investigation. Now, you're going to lose them on your methods, whether you like it or not. So I just say keep it brief. Keep it brief, get to the point. We're using mass spec, we're using biomechanics, we're doing stem cell this, we're measuring electrophysiology, conduction potential of these nerves, what have you. Just keep it very brief, because people in the audience, they either know what you're talking about or they really don't care. Do not get bogged down in the details of methodology, please. Keep the emotional drop, that emotional void you're about to create, as minimal as possible, okay? And then you're going to lose them a little bit in the results as well, hopefully not much, okay? So just resign yourself to the fact that your methods are going to be a little bit boring. You're going to create this really nice back and forth. You're going to engage the audience, make them the hero along with you. And you're going to lose them a little bit in the methods. You're going to lose them a little bit in the results. That's okay. Just minimize it, all right? So look where we're at. Here's our results. But look where we were before. And I'm usually at an emotional low once they get to the results. Unless I am there, because it's very similar research to what I'm conducting, and I kind of understand the methods they just spoke about, but oftentimes I'm just not that smart. So I really don't understand the methods. They get to the results and I'm bored at this point in time. I want them to start wrapping it up and see if I could pull something out of this. So let's go back to where we're at. So let's lose our axes. I think that emotional connection makes sense to everyone. And let's just see where we're at from a time frame standpoint. So we're at the results. So if you look at the art of a presentation of any play, at this point in time, any stepwise decrease in emotional context, you would instinctually think, okay, I got to start pulling myself back up here. I got to start engaging the audience. But what you actually want to do is you want to drop them right back down for two reasons. You want to drop them back down and discuss the present knowledge again. Remind them why they're sitting there. A good story repeats itself. A good grant, a good manuscript, has internal consistency. Okay? You use the same term over and over and over again. You don't slightly change that term because you're bored with yourself. You use the exact same term. That's why scientific papers are boring to read sometimes. Okay? You call it the external knee adduction moment. You don't call it knee loading one time and then call it torque a different time. You call it the external knee adduction moment because everyone understands that. Okay? So you've already talked about present knowledge back here. At this point, you started with present knowledge. So bring it back to the beginning. Bring it back to the beginning. Repeat why this is important. Okay? Because you want to start discussing your results. You want to put your results in a totally different playing field altogether. So drop them down and then again, create that emotional void. And they're going to be with you. Okay? If you've done this artfully enough, you've engaged them, you've depressed them. You've engaged them, you've depressed them. A little bit of depressing, a little bit of depressing, and oh my God. Thanks for reminding me why this is such a problem. But look at our research. But. This is your but. So yeah, it's a huge burden on the healthcare system, but our research is very unique. And discuss it briefly and really, do it in a manner that you would usually do it. Take your results and put it in context with other research. Let them know that there's some agreement, there's some disagreement. Okay? And then talk about the new bliss. So what are your conclusions? How is this going to improve everything? Conclusions should not be rehashing your results. Your conclusions should really be future directions. And how is your research going to keep everyone engaged as the hero? So what needs to be done now? So if you engage everybody as a final note in terms of how can they go back to their respective labs and keep working on this, that's what people want to leave with. People want to know, how can I be involved in this? How can I do multidisciplinary research? How is what I'm doing important to what Nathan's doing? I have no idea. I'd like to talk to him about it. Ziad and I have many conversations back and forth. It makes perfect sense that there should be some collaboration in some respects, because there's this new bliss just waiting for us out there. Okay? So my humans and his mice could one day interact. It's not so utopian as that, but if you think about mapping each slide into these sections and trying to make that gap as big as possible, it makes for a really interesting, engaging presentation.